Hey everyone, and welcome to another XIM video. In this series we will take a closer look at XIM related topics which are very popular right now, but no one really seems to understand the purpose or the logic behind them. Because of that, people often misinterpret these topics or have a false opinion on them. In each video I will go over one of these topics and will explain you everything you need to know to fully understand it. And at the end of the video you will be able to judge by yourself if the discussed topic is useful for your gameplay or not. Also, if you would like to suggest a topic that I should cover in a future video, then you can do so by posting in the comments down below. So today we will take a closer look at the MJFame config. The MJFame config is one of the most popular configs in the XIM forum, but also one of the most controversial ones. This config is actually so polarizing that you will either find people who think it's the best config ever, or XIM users who regard it as a very bad config or a gimmick at best. So today I will show you how to set up the config, how it actually works, and if it's as good as its creator claims. But let's start with the config itself before we dive into its mechanics. You can find a link to the config in the video description. By slowly scrolling through the config you can already tell it's a rather complicated one and involves a lot of setup adjustments, which is why I will now break it down for you step by step. That way you can try the config by yourself to make up your own mind. So start your XIM manager now and load a brand new game profile. The MJFame config basically works with every game, so test it with your favorite console title first. That way you have a better feeling for how the config performs against your regular XIM config. I will use Black Ops 4 for this video. The first step is to set up your mouse settings. This config requires you to set your mouse DPI to 800. Yes, you heard right, 800 DPI. Do not use any other value. The main reason for 800 DPI is to ensure that your mouse runs on a native DPI profile. The second adjustment step is to set the mouse to 1000 Hz. After that you can go into the global settings in the top right of your XIM manager and change your polling rate. Set it to 1000 Hz as well. If you cannot see the polling rate option, then tick the expert mode box. The expert mode is also necessary for the config adjustments that we will do later. Now save your changes in the bottom right and restart your XIM. Polling rate changes only become active after a restart of your XIM, so unplug it from your console and plug it in again. Once your XIM is running again, load your brand new game config and go into the editing mode in the top left. As you can see, I already renamed this config to Black Ops 4 MJFame. You can do that too now if you want to. As a hotkey I assigned the F1 key and the config color will be yellow. Via hotkeys I can then quickly switch between my regular Black Ops 4 config and the MJFame one to see which one I like more. Now switch over to the hip settings by swiping one time to the right. The first thing you have to do here is to set your XIM sensitivity to 500. Yes, I said 500, once again a pretty ridiculous value and one of the reasons for why this config is so controversial. So set your sensitivity to 500 and after that expand the advanced settings right below. There you have to switch your synchronization to off. Don't use any other synchronization for this config. The next step is to set your smoothing to maximum, which is 20. This will be necessary to keep the mouse stutter at a very low value. The last step comes now, which is also the most important one. Click on the Ballistic curve generator at the very top. You will now adjust your mouse sensitivity via the Ballistic curve. For a game with 60 FPS you move the curve adjustment point to the 60% mark. You do that by clicking on the right arrow until you have reached a value of 60. Or you can also use the slider like me. After that move the right slider all the way up to the top. Your curve generator should now show a value of 100 at the bottom. This will be your starting sensitivity for 60 FPS games. To change your mouse sensitivity you will now start to adjust the curve. To increase your mouse sensitivity just move the curve more to the left. For that press the left arrow at the bottom and after that move the curve up to 100% again. Your mouse sensitivity in the game should now be slightly faster. If you now want to reduce the sensitivity you will do the exact opposite. Press the clear button to delete the curve and then move the horizontal slider to the 62 mark instead. Now do the very same as before and increase the point to 100 by moving the right slider all the way to the top. Your sensitivity in the game will now be slightly faster. So again, to increase your sensitivity move the curve to the left and to reduce it move the curve to the right. If you want to reduce the sensitivity you will always have to clear the curve first. So move the curve around as often as necessary now until you found your preferred sensitivity. For 30 FPS games you should start with a curve value of 30 instead of 60. So if you play games such as Destiny, then move the curve slider to 30 and increase this point to 100 afterwards. The procedure to adjust your mouse sensitivity is then the very same. Since Black Ops 4 is a 60 FPS game, I will switch it back to 60 though. I prefer to play Call of Duty games with a slightly faster sensitivity, so I will move the curve a little bit more to the left. Actually, MJFame recommends to use a slightly higher sensitivity than what you would normally play with, so maybe takes it into consideration too when dialing in your sensitivity. Once you have moved the curve to a spot with a really good mouse sensitivity, you can close the ballistic curve generator. The next thing you can do is to bind your button bindings. I will skip that now though, since the button bindings do not have any influence on this config, so just go with the same button bindings that you use in your regular XIM config too. The next thing is to adjust your ADS config, so swipe one more time to the right. You now have to do the very same as before, so start by setting your XIM sensitivity to 500 again. After that, expand the advanced settings and switch the synchronization to off. Don't forget to also set the smoothing to 20 again. At last, open the ballistic curve generator once more and do the very same as before. For 30 FPS games, start with a value of 30, and for 60 FPS games, start with a value of 60. Just like in my hip config, I prefer to play Black Ops 4 with a slightly faster sensitivity, so I will move the 60% mark a little bit to the left and increase it then to 100 again. Once you have found a good sensitivity, you can close the ballistic curve generator. The MJFame config is now complete and you can hit the save button in the top left. In the last few minutes I want to discuss how this config actually works and what it does to your mouse movements. So let's look at the mechanics of this config first. The big benefit of the MJFame config is that it also works with very low DPI mice. Not every mouse can run more than 800 DPI, especially regular desktop mice will usually not offer more than that. As a fast sensitivity player, you will then quickly reach the maximum XIM sensitivity limit of 500, which might not be fast enough for you. But thanks to the ballistic curve, you can increase your mouse sensitivity even beyond the limitation of 500. This also applies to mice that don't have any onboard memory. Without onboard memory, your mouse will usually fall back to a default DPI value, which often is around 800 DPI. Another thing to consider is that normally a DPI value of 800 is not enough for the XIM. Your XIM will then have to interpolate your mouse movements by so much that you will experience a very strong mouse stutter in the game. That's why the MJFame config uses so much smoothing, as otherwise the mouse movements would feel really bad. If you try the config without the smoothing, you will see what I mean by that. The last integral part of the MJFame config is the sensitivity adjustment via the ballistic curve. To understand what the curve does, let's look at the following picture. In black we have the regular default curve and in red a pretty fast MJFame curve. The bottom axis of a curve always showcases the physical mouse movements on your mousepad. The left axis is the crosshair speed that you will then get in the game. Let's quickly look at the default curve first. This curve is also called linear curve. The reason is that when you move your mouse with a speed of 3 on the mousepad, your crosshair in the game will also move with a speed of 3. The same applies to any other value too. So if you move your mouse twice as fast on a mousepad, your crosshair will then also move twice as fast in the game. That's why this curve is called linear curve. But what happens if we look at the red MJFame curve? If you move your mouse at a speed of 2 on the mousepad, then this results in a crosshair speed of 5 in the game. So this curve basically multiplies your sensitivity by 2.5. This means you could also just multiply your regular XIM sensitivity by 2.5 and use the default linear curve instead. However, don't forget that your XIM sensitivity is capped at 500, so this curve basically allows you to increase your mouse sensitivity beyond that limit. With that curve we would actually play on a XIM sensitivity of 1250, and the crazy part is that the MJFame curve is also linear. If you move your mouse at twice the speed, so with a value of 4, you also get a crosshair speed of 10 in return. So once again, if you move your mouse at twice the speed on a mousepad, you will also double your crosshair movement speed in the game. A linear curve behavior is very important for your mouse accuracy. It allows you to build up muscle memory because your crosshair speed will always remain predictable. So now that the general mechanics of the MJFame config are clear, let's look at the pros and cons of this config to find out if it's any good. The biggest advantage of the MJFame config is how it deals with the aim assist. Especially in games with a very strong aim assist, such as Call of Duty, the config plays exceptionally well. There are hardly any aim assist problems and you can easily enter or leave the aim assist bubble without reducing or increasing the aim assist itself. The reason for that lies in the combination of a very high XIM sensitivity interpolation with a very high smoothing value. That results in mouse movements that are quite similar to those of a quantization config, which is something that I might show you in a future XIM video. Another advantage is that the 800 DPI profile basically guarantees that you run on a native DPI value, so no DPI upscaling or smoothing is done on the mouse sensor side. This can otherwise create a delay and make your mouse movements feel slightly delayed or even sluggish. This already leads us to the downsides of this config though. It's a bit questionable to avoid DPI upscaling and mouse sensor smoothing by adding a lot of sensitivity upscaling and smoothing on the XIM side instead. So you basically just shift the smoothing and upscaling from the mouse to the XIM. While both the upscaling and smoothing algorithm of the XIM are really good, it still isn't a good idea to use the maximum values that both algorithms support. And on top of that, you even add more upscaling by adjusting the ballistic curve. That is also the main criticism of this config. Nevertheless, in my opinion, the MJFame config is by far one of the most creative and unconventional configs that I have seen so far, and I can only recommend you to give it a try. The config may not work very well with every game though. For example, games without any aim assist don't play that well. Either way, definitely let me know how the MJFame config works out for you and for which game you used it. Guys, if you liked this video, hit the like button or even subscribe to this channel. And for the crazy guys out there, you can even become a channel member now. I'd really appreciate that. Also, let me know if you would like to see more of these XIM videos, and don't forget to post your own suggestions in the video description. But that's about it for this video guys, thanks for watching and I will maybe see you in the next one.